So spirituality is ultimately it's a multifold path. You see, and your journey and destiny will end up unfolding entirely different than anybody else's by merit of the very nature that you're an individual. And so you can't expect your development to follow or mirror the paths of others. It could, in many respects. There could be different stages of personal or spiritual development that you can look to for samples or examples from others. You can look at some very elevated spiritual person, so to say, as the final goal, so to say. But the problem is, you have to be aware of the trap of looking at that as a. You can't take the description as a prescription. So if you see somebody who's never angry, because they're so elevated, right? And they don't get bothered by the worldly things or their own thoughts or whatever. And then you think, okay, well, let me not be angry. It doesn't work. There is an element to which behaviorism plays a role here with respect to conditioning. But you will, generally speaking, get a lot of pent-up anger. You won't get past barriers of the internal hurt. A lot of times getting past the anger barrier by expressing it allows you to actually fully feel the emotion that you have and release it. It allows you to explore the hurt that's actually underlying the anger. So the whole don't be angry thing doesn't necessarily actually get you closer to not being angry. As a matter of fact, it can just keep you stuck. As a matter of fact, it keeps you safe, so to say, in a mental construct of what a spiritual person is. And that's the number one issue, I'd say, with respect to people when they're going along the spiritual path. They develop an identity out of it. Now, insofar as you develop an identity, you will. I mean, unless you're enlightened, you will have an identity around whatever it is that you're doing. But if it's a spiritual identity, that's okay. And in some ways, it can progress you. You know, if you think, a spiritual person shouldn't be angry. I detect there's a lot of anger within me. Let me explore this. Let me think about it. Let me introspect. Let me, over time, try to reduce this. That can be good. It can be, insofar as you have that type of, identity. But again, the spiritual identity can ultimately be the biggest trap, because instead of actually elevating in consciousness, you trick yourself. Your mind tricks yourself into becoming the most spiritual person. There's this fantastic book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and without giving much away, Siddhartha ends up going on that type of spiritual identity path and tries to outcompete other people, and he ultimately sees its folly. You see? So ultimately what ends up happening is that descriptors can become perverted. They can become co-opted by the ego to simply develop another ego, except one now more clever and cunning than the material ego who's obsessed with like money or whatever material things there may be. See, spiritual development is ultimately about the transcendence of your mind and, in a larger sense, your existence on earth. It's about touching with the very deepest part of yourself. Then when you see somebody who's actually done that, say if you actually met the Buddha or something, you'll detect a lot of qualities in them that you don't necessarily see within other people. But you cannot brute force them into your life. The hard work path is only part of the spiritual journey. Deeper realizations, truer expressions of self, freedom, ultimately is what this leads to, right? And it's a marriage in a sense of like discipline, certain practices, meditation and so forth, but in a larger sense, just realizations, deeper introspections, and the deeper unfoldings of your larger and larger and larger self. So, and that's ultimately how the Buddha did it. There's so many people like who are just trying to find happiness, and they'll do anything. And ultimately, that's what all things are. That's what all egos are. They're essentially just things designed to A, help you survive, B, perpetuate the needs of the ego or the desires, and C, help you feel happiness. Right? That's your ultimate sort of goal. But going about it in egoic ways, especially spiritually egoic ways, is essentially guaranteed to lead to failure. So just keep all that in mind.